The PSNI has requested assistance from police forces in Britain in order to quell the violence in Ballymena. A number of people remain in custody this evening following the violent disturbances in the County Antrim town. Over the past 2 nights, several properties and vehicles had been set on fire, and last night alone, 17 police officers were injured in clashes with rioters. The trouble flared on Monday night following a protest linked to an alleged sexual assault in the town, as the North braces itself for another night of disorder, with news that it has spread to Larne. I'm joined from Derry by activist and journalist Eamonn McCann. Eamonn, it's good to talk to you. What is the latest that you're hearing in the North this evening?
Well, a lot of what one hears at the moment is sort of terrified speculation. And people are right, I suppose, to be terrified. But facts for this evening are still few on the ground, as you say. Sort of there was an attack on a leisure centre in Larne because people, the attackers, believed, rightly or wrongly, that it was being used to house people that they didn't want in their area. So we've got tension across lots of areas. I know that on the waterside here in Derry, there hasn't yet been any outbreak worthy of news coverage, but still there is considerable tension that anything could spark this off, sort of in Protestant working class areas of the town. So you've got a very serious situation here, and it's not confined, as I say, to any one area. And what's more, it's not unprecedented. I heard somebody on a television programme tonight saying this unprecedented violence. It's not unprecedented. We had race riots in Belfast in 2003. We had race conflict and race fighting. I was in 2009. We had 2024, just a couple of years ago. We had a very serious situation with which had racist undertones, indeed, quite explicitly. So these things have happened over and over and over again. Indeed, only last year. There was trouble only last year. There were vehicles being burned in the same areas where they are being burned tonight. And one of the questions which arises is that how come this has made sort of sensational headlines, whereas on the previous occasions, nothing happened at all. Indeed, many people have forgotten all about them, including people here, put it in the past. So there's a long-standing problem here with simmering tensions, and there's no simple solution to it. And certainly there's no solution by saying, let's get contingents of police officers over from Scotland and Northern England to quell it. Well, I suppose in physical terms, that might work in getting people off the streets, but it's not going to solve anything. I think this is a more deep-rooted problem in the North than it's given credit for.
And why do you think it's getting more attention this time? Is it because the race issue is just more charged everywhere at the moment?
Yes, I do. And I think that one of the factors, a major factor, was the rioting in Southport in Lancashire last year. You might remember. And that spread to a number of other cities. And indeed, there were scenes of liveliness, as one newspaper said it, around Protestant areas in Belfast. So, there's nothing unprecedented about this. Northern Ireland, The Guardian, as I say, described Belfast as the race-hate capital of the world just a few years ago. And again, that's forgotten. And one of the reasons I think you're asking, why is it making the news headlines now, I think as well, just that it's seen as the culmination, and it is the culmination of a series of things that went before. And as always in these things, that I'm not sneering at anybody or any particular political tendency. I mean, but there's always over and over that this is doing us no good and calling up people to be peaceful and so on. There are actual problems here which don't excuse the racist bigotry. But I mean, underlying it, there are problems which then can be used to justify it. I just heard, sort of a representative of the Traditional Unionist Party led by Jim Allister on local radio here. I'm more or less saying, well, what can you do? It's understandable given sort of the unfair treatment sort of that the young people in these areas have received. And that's quite common. I mean, there's sort of a desperate effort to understand what's happening and then to frame policy or to frame a programme of action around the sense that this is somehow justified. Now, in individual cases, young people behaving like that, this might be justified sort of for them. I wouldn't blame them, but they're products of their environment. But nevertheless, there is a toleration sectarianism in the North has led to a situation where there's a tolerance for these things. And people say, we understand it better than people across the water. And to a certain extent, maybe we do. But it's it's a very depressing situation. I just say, for example, I've got a friend, Beverly. She's a nurse here in Derry. She comes from Guyana, and she's been living in Derry for 25 years. Now, she said, recently that for the first time in her life, she feels terrified. She's terrified, dismayed, and shocked. Were the three words she used. Now, that's one sort of woman who's been working as a nurse in the Elton McGavin Hospital here. It's certainly not harming anybody or not, provoking anybody. And when people like that begin to think, I'm going to be a target, or maybe I am a target already, then we've reached sort of a very serious situation indeed.
And Eamonn, is this then, in your mind, is this a manifestation of what? Is it of sectarianism, as you mentioned? Is it just of racism? Is it of deprivation in those Protestant working class areas? Is it all of the above?
It is all of the above, as you say. But there is a direct connection between the sectarian structures of Northern Ireland society and what's happening sort of on the race front, if I can put it like that. It's commonly said in Dublin, indeed, sort of after certain incidents in Coolock and so on, people were saying, well, this is a depraved community, etc. In the north, you hear the same thing, but you have the added dimension, the added layer of sectarianism here. I think all the young people, if you look at some of the news tonight on BBC Northern Ireland and the new TV, and what you see sort of as young people, some of them 10, 11 years old, and I'm sort of reminded of the fact I've seen 100 riots. I'm old enough to have done that. On every single one, as far as I remember, people point to the youth of some of those involved, and say it's to do with that and to do with the fact we're rearing sort of feral youth across. But I mean, if you're and just looking at some of the pictures now, sort of the burning of that leisure centre in Larne, sort of if you feel you're being left behind, then you're going to be angry. And when people are told that they've been left behind in Northern Ireland, it's not really, on most instances, that they're being left behind economically, although that, of course, is true as well, is that they believe their community is being left behind. And therefore, they see, sort of in the same way as they might see sectarianism, they see sort of their community being targeted because they're not being targeted. I mean, it's just the way things are. But that's a part of the context in which this happened, this separation, jagged separation between the two communities and the history of comparing yourself to somebody outside. Factor that in and you've got the English situation with the extra Northern Irish dimension to it.
Claire Kerrane, given the fact that this has spread to Larne and that leisure centre, we saw those images of it on fire as well, I don't want to engage in hysteria, and it's important we don't do that. But, I mean, would we be naive to think that you couldn't see similar scenes down here? I mean, we did, arguably, in Dublin.
Yes, and we have. And obviously we've seen a number of incidents, particularly in Dublin, and they have had a racial element to them. So, unfortunately, this is something we have seen already, and we're now seeing in the north, and as has been said, not for the first time. And what's really important now is that whatever resources are needed by the PSNI, that they get in there and that they get the situation under control. This is, I think, the third night now. And obviously we have seen similar scenes here, so the situation needs to be brought under control. And then we need to also see elected representatives and everyone in public life speaking about this in a responsible way and not actually adding fuel to the fire. And those of us with a position of power to some degree need to be sensible in terms of our commentary.
Are there politicians adding fuel to the fire?
Well, I think Eamonn gave an example there. I think the word used was that this is understandable. Like that is never, that should not be said. Nothing that is happening right now in the north in terms of Larne or Ballymena is in any way acceptable. And those that are engaging in it are achieving nothing, absolutely nothing for the community, only terror and putting people that are living in their homes afraid of their lives. That achieves nothing.
Yeah, the difference, arguably, with what we saw in Dublin, Mary, was there was an element of just kind of opportunism to the rioting there. Now, I'm sure there's some of that in the north, but it's much more focused. Like you see Filipino families, I saw them on the news earlier, putting up Filipino flags in their windows so that people would know that they weren't, that was the country they hailed from, and that they shouldn't be targets. Lots of other immigrant families just putting Union Jacks up in the windows, kind of as a way of maybe of signifying their Britishness and to be left alone. It's terrifying stuff for them. Yeah,
and the different element here is that individual people's and families' homes are being targeted, and that is something that is so frightening, and during the Dublin riots, aggression was breaking out on the main street on O'Connell Street, and yes, businesses felt under threat, but I don't think any households at that point felt under any particular threat. But I think the same dynamic is at play in how these things sort of evolve. I think it's, remarkable how quickly something can morph into what might be a community concern over a particular incident, and then very, very quickly it grows from that into violence on the streets. And like one element that was at play in what's happening in Ballymena that's very familiar to what happened in Dublin is that you have a particular incident, in this case the allegations of sexual assault. You have community concern expressed through maybe X, WhatsApp, Facebook, and then that concern is completely and utterly amplified through the algorithm, to the point that very, very, very quickly you have people who have nothing to do with these communities, who don't live anywhere near them, who mightn't even live in the country, as we've seen in this instance, getting involved online and stirring up that fear. So that's the mix that allows things to escalate so quickly. And you have these social media platforms, and it was similar in the case of the incident in Carlow a few weeks ago, where there was absolute misinformation. A lot of it coming from outside this country, misinformation claiming that a number of people had been shot, misinformation saying there was a terrorist involved here. Those particular pieces online were coming from outside this country, and that's feeding into the communities themselves. And the next thing, you just have this sort of widespread, xenophobic driven aggression and violence, and an awful lot of it is circulating on social media. And you'd have to question when, for example, we had the Taoiseach coming out saying what happened in the Carlow incident was completely unacceptable, and all the misinformation and lies and falsehoods that were being spread. But what is being done to stop these platforms from spreading this? And where is their responsibility in all of this? It doesn't seem to be any. You can incite violence online, you can encourage racism and xenophobia, and that's it. There is nothing to stop that happening.
Eamonn, to what degree is that swirling around all of these issues as well in Ballymena and Larne, misinformation and disinformation?
Oh gosh, loads of it, of course. And that seems to be true everywhere, from the United States to South Korea. I was reading some commentary on a couple of days ago, and that was exactly their emphasis. All this misinformation swirling around, and that's true of the North as well, of course, and has been. But there is one extra thing here as well as disinformation. The idea of burning people out of their homes. And we've seen attempts at that on 4 occasions, successful attempts at burning people out of their homes. That's not unique to racism. That has been happening literally throughout the history of the Northern Ireland state. 50 years ago, people were burned 55 years ago now. Whole streets in North Belfast were burned out because they were Catholic. And we had a refugee problem. We had 2,500 people living in tents and in military barracks in Southern Ireland. So don't let's think, I agree with everything that our previous speaker was saying. It's just that there's more to it. I'm not disagreeing with what you said about, online provocation and so forth. But we had these problems. We had streets burned and people burned out of their houses and people killed in Northern Ireland, sort of in riots, and more or less the same places as we're seeing now. So that's a very depressing dimension of it to contemplate. But it's there, and it may well be that that's the most important aspect of what's happening.
Claire, what should the government do about these social media companies?
Yeah, I wish there was a magic wand for that one. I think we need to, look, what can social media company,
Data Protection Commissioner hits them with these huge fines when they kind of move some of our information from one column to another when they shouldn't.
And you would like to think, because
and yet, as Mary says, all of this misinformation is allowed to swirl around and there's no comeback.
And we see it all the time, whether it's proposed iPass accommodation, refugees. It is constant online, and most of it is absolute rubbish, but people can say what they want without any legitimacy. And you would like to think because they're based here that we would have some say over it, but it doesn't appear to be the case. They appear to be laws unto themselves. I mean, we remember when X were being invited into the committee that to be repeatedly asked they didn't want to come in, and they appear to be allowed to be a law unto themselves.
But they also snubbed, when Norma Foley was Minister for Education, she wanted to sit down with the social media companies to talk about child protection, and X basically said, no, you're grand, we're busy.
Yeah. So we...
Does the fact that they're actually located there, actually, you suggested maybe that would make it easier. Is that what makes it harder?
Yeah, well, perhaps it does. I mean, they're here, they're based in Ireland, and I think they need to start realising they have a serious responsibility here, given what we're seeing on social media. But they do appear to be a law unto themselves, and whether it's something we can do nationally or something that needs to be done at EU level, they need to step up. And if they're not going to step up, they're going to have to be forced to step up. But right now, social media on all of these issues, particularly when it comes to refugees and our most vulnerable, it is out of control. And it is so nasty and so negative, and there is so much misinformation and mistruth, and people need to be wiser to that as well.